part of it, as you're pointing to, it's about nurturing relationships.
Right.
Right. That some people refer to community organizing as relational organizing. That the foundation of it is building relationships of trust, where it's not simply a transaction. You do this for me and I'll do this for you, but rather building trust and care and concern so that we know we're working towards a common goal and we have each other's best interests at heart.
Organizing to me is like empowering people, because I have this thing I say that's more of like people closest to a problem are closest to the solution. So instead of like the normal type of like problem solving or leadership styles that we have, which is top down, we recognize that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So you don't bring solutions to them, you come to them for solutions. And that in my mind is what organizing is, trying to work with those people to figure out what kinds of like solutions they need the most. And that to me is organizing.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Phoenix Generation Podcast. You know me. I'm your host, Dr. Lua Hancock, the Vice President of the Ginsberg Family Foundation for the Phoenix Generation. And our podcast talks about issues that impact youth, and we like to talk with youth about those issues, especially issues of building dialogue across difference and building community in their campuses and beyond. So we are super excited about our two guests today. We're going to dig right in. So I want to introduce our first guest, Dr. Jeremy Panadus. He is a faculty member in his fourth year at Stetson University, has a very cool position there, the Marchman Chair of Civic and Social Responsibility, which is a position that was created for the faculty to focus on social justice and community engagement. Prior to that, he taught 11 years at a college on the rural border of Texas and Oklahoma, earned his PhD at Emory, his bachelor's degree at University of Chicago. His research focuses on the intersections of economic justice and reproductive justice. This podcast is not about that, but I need to know more. And he worked with a large religious denomination in the U.S. to end its policies discriminating against LGBTQ policies. So down on the ground, in the grassroots. He's been an organizer for a labor union, worked in social work at a pediatric hospital. And I told him I love that his bio says that during high school, he was an award-winning fast food drive-through cashier. So congratulations on that and all the things that came since. We're so excited to have you.
It's really great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. And Derek and I, we've worked together for a very long time. Derek Doe is a rising senior at Stetson University. We were just talking about his senior research, which is going to be starting soon. He's studying economics and environmental science. Derek is originally from Ghana and has started his own nonprofit called the Community Tent, which we will talk a little bit about. He's had lots of quality internships, including a couple in DC, worked for the Congressional Hunger Center and the Millennium Challenge, also is a Bonner Fellow, a Ginsberg Fellow, all the leadership things, and just recently found out that this summer he will spend it at a summer program at Princeton. Congratulations. Also, just on the side, he loves movies, is a big cinephile, and has also worked in fast food. So, yeah. I worked at the cookie place in the mall, so it's not exactly fast food, but it's service, the service industry. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how do you make real impact if you're a youth? If you're a youth and you think, I want to make change in my community, which a lot of youth do, but I want to do it in a way that actually makes impact and in a way that is going to leave some type of legacy or do something. So today we're going to give you the top 5 tips of what you need to get there. Let's just jump right in. We'll start with Dr. Panadus. Tell me a little bit about, for people who don't know this term, what is community organizing and why do you think that it's so important?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And people might hear this term a lot without knowing what it means, or it might be a new term. When we use it both at Stetson where I teach, but also in the Changemakers Academy, which is an exciting program that is supported and only possible because of the support from Ginsberg. But the Changemakers Academy is a summer program for high school students to learn the basics of community organizing. In both those contexts, when we talk about community organizing, we're focused on 3 things. First of all, it's leadership that arises within the community itself. And what makes the organizing approach what it is first of all, it's based on the community's own sense of its problems, its priorities, its needs, and what kind of solutions make sense for the community, right? Second of all, community organizing is, because it's based in the community, it's not driven by one single leader, but by raising up multiple leaders, right? It's not focused just on one person who knows everything or has all the answers, but many people in the community coming together and recognizing many people have different leadership gifts that can contribute to making positive change. Finally, community organizing focuses ultimately on addressing not just the effects, but the root causes of problems that a community faces. So dismantling the structures, dismantling the practices, not simply addressing the effects. Addressing the effects is important, but in community organizing, we recognize unless we go to the root causes, we're just going to, in 2 or 5 or 10 years, have the same challenges.
So this is interesting because when you're talking, I'm thinking, this sounds significantly different from some more hierarchical or traditional leadership that I'm used to, right? You're like, oh, people who are on the ground have the answers for themselves. They're working as a collective, not one leader, top down, right? And we're actually going to get to root causes, not just Band-Aids, putting quick things. It's pretty different than models that we're used to, no?
Absolutely. It's everybody can contribute to make change, which means it reflects a commitment to equality and really democracy. The sense that we're all part of building a better society with one another, that no one person knows what our society should be, but that we collectively, through dialogue and collaboration, we can together create a better society for everyone.
So I want to pause on this point for a minute, even though we just started, because it seems like this would be something that everyone would get and understand and say, yes, of course, everyone has power and everyone has power to make decisions. And if we can activate that ability within everyone to where they feel like they can, be a protagonist in their own community, be a change agent, but the system is not set up that way. The amount of, I think, apathy or maybe just going with the inertia of the world that currently is kind of rewarded or almost the default. So I think it is a pretty profound and revolutionary idea, even though it has existed throughout history, to think, hey, let's do the grassroots work to help people who are actually experiencing issues work with us on how to move them forward. So I think that we should definitely just recognize that this is a whole new way of thinking that has the ability to unleash so much potential that's just sitting there, right, on tap. So that's really exciting. So tell me, how did you get interested in starting thinking about community organizing, thinking about community work in the first place?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. In both high school and college, I was very involved in the community, but really in a more of a direct service approach, sort of helping people and communities who are immediately experiencing. Near the end of college, I was able to be part of some programs that really helped me explore more of the root causes. And then in my master's degree, I was lucky that I got to be mentored by several great organizers. But that was the first time I had really understood community organizing as we're talking about it now. It wasn't until my master's degree. So one of my commitments and one of the things I really am excited also about what Phoenix Generation is doing is reaching people much earlier in their journeys as change makers,
right?
To understand this community organizing approach. So during my master's degree, that's when I was both an organizer in a religious community that I was part of, as well as for a labor union. And I learned a lot of different practices for organizing. And then I've been lucky that the position I have at Stetson allows me to teach students about it. And as I mentioned earlier, Changemakers Academy is our newest expression of that, where we're really wanting high school students to really understand they're also organizers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up, this is not that well known of a fact, but I grew up on a native reservation, the Pine Ridge Lakota Reservation. And I think, I don't know, growing up, just how my parents were very into like rural and public health and whatever. So I always had this idea that there was power in the people, that, we can rise up, we can figure out how to solve some of our own issues. I think for me, the big aha was going to college and being like, oh, this is like a field. This is a thing. This is not something that everyone does. This is not the typical kind of leadership. But I think one thing that we try to, I don't want to use the word preach, but that we try to think about in the Phoenix Generation is that inherent nobility in every person. And if that is there, then we would run ourselves in a different way. If we believed that power was there, that ability to move things was there, we would organize ourselves quite differently, I think. So yeah, Derek, I know a lot about your background. It's very interesting and inspiring to me. Talk a little bit about how you got here, where you came from, and what kind of parts of your life inspired you to want to be involved in community organizing.
Yeah. And before I even answer that question, I think I'll just piggyback a little bit on what Dr. Panadus said on what organizing is. And I think in my own language, organizing to me is like empowering people, because I have this thing I say that's more of like people closest to a problem are closest to the solution. So instead of like the normal type of like problem solving or leadership styles that we have, which is top down, we recognize that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So you don't bring solutions to them, you come to them for solutions. And that in my mind is what organizing is, trying to work with those people to figure out what kinds of like solutions they need the most. And that to me is organizing. And that I think is what I've tried to build into the programs I run, which is the community tent, as you mentioned earlier, which is essentially about housing insecurity. Because I personally grew up in a housing insecure environment, and I started a program as a way to address housing insecurity, but I didn't realize that I do not necessarily have the solutions to the problem. I had ideas of like, we have to build houses for people. We have abandoned houses. We have to put people in there. But those were me having ideas as to what the solution should be. And over time, with also Dr. Posada's classes on like what organizing is, that has evolved over time to figure out ways we could rather talk to people who are affected by housing insecurity, who grew up in those environments, to figure out what to them is the solution to housing insecurity. And I think that's a way I understand how organizing and how I've gotten here. I think it's what drives my career objectives, my career goals, and the places I find myself.
Yeah, and I think in some way, everyone can relate to this idea of community organizing, human empowerment in some way. For example, I just think about my interpersonal relationships. If someone came to me about an issue that I was having and thought that they had all the advice and the answers, and they started talking to me in that way, like that's not exactly like inspiring to me, right? What do we think? Even with someone we care about a lot, like it would be better if they talked to me and asked about things, tried to help me understand the situation better in a way that I could try to come up with some type of solution. Same thing in social work, counseling, right? I mean, this is something that I think all of us could try a little bit more, maybe in our interpersonal relationships. And then I always took this approach. I worked in higher education with students even. That's their campus. Like, how am I to know? Right now at this age, my kids are actually in college. So, of course, I've worked in higher education a long time. My kids are in college, I can relate. But in that moment of time for those students on that campus, what do they need in order to reach the goals? And how do we help them to ask, which sometimes I actually found them surprised that we were asking, or that they could articulate that. So I think everyone, if they're working in a hospital setting, has patience. If they're working, almost in any setting you're in, there's an ability to, even in that setting, even if you're like, wow, some of these projects are so inspiring, but I don't know if I can start my own nonprofit. This approach of community organizing, I think, has served me well in my life.
Well, and part of it, as you're pointing to, it's about nurturing relationships.
Right.
Right. That some people refer to community organizing as relational organizing, that the foundation of it is building relationships of trust, where it's not simply a transaction. You do this for me and I'll do this for you, but rather building trust and care and concern so that we know we're working towards a common goal and we have each other's best interests at heart. And that's another part of what makes good organizing, because it's about sustaining, nurturing relationships. And we say community organizing, and part of it is we have to be in community well with each other to organize well together.
Right. Yeah. And there are lots of challenges. I think if we were to be fair to ourselves, even pace, different things in the world that make that you have to be very mindful and purposeful about the choice to slow down and be in community with others, right? So this does have some best practice steps. Let's dig into those. Talk to me a little bit about what the framework is for community organizing. Maybe run me through the steps, and then let's dig into the first one.
Sure, yeah. So we developed this model at Stetson as we were thinking about, my colleague, Reverend Caitlin White-Swan and I, we have both been organizers, and we know a lot of both the theory and the jargon and all that, but we realized if we're going to be wanting to introduce this to youth, we need to boil it down in a really practical way. So we were able to come up with this framework of 5 steps, and they are simply, there's nothing simple about them, but we hope that they are communicated in a direct way. 1, gather more leaders. 2, listen and learn. 3, strategize. 4, act. 5, reflect. And one of the things I want to point out right away from naming them is we are trying to encourage people, typically when particularly young people or really anyone gets on fire to want to change something, there's often a move immediately to want to act.
Okay.
And to your point about pace, we want to encourage people, no, even before we're ready to act, there are things we have to do to be ready to act, right? We're gathering other leaders, we're listening and learning, we're strategizing. And once we've acted, we always have to have reflection built into it, right? We have to think carefully about what's going well, what's not going well, who's part of the conversation, who's not part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As someone who has been accused, rightfully so, of kind of reckless enthusiasm. I have this passion, I have these ideas, I want to jump in, I want to help, I don't want to look at, are there other agencies already doing this? Are there people, has there data that shows how this could be impactful? So I think that reckless enthusiasm is a positive thing from youth, but could be harnessed in such a way that we can also make it, more purposeful.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we never want people to lose touch with either the enthusiasm or, frankly, the anger at what's going wrong. Both of those feelings are important for change, but we want to channel them in ways that are going to be the most effective. We always want people to stay in touch with both the joy they seek for their communities and the anger at what's going wrong in their communities. But how do we channel those so that we can act strategically and smartly, and also so that we don't exhaust ourselves? One of the other challenges is how do we keep people energized to keep acting and reflecting and strategizing over the long
haul? And I think those 5 steps kind of like also give a way to, again, because the first one we have is gather more leaders. It kind of like takes the person who has the enthusiasm or the person who has the anger out of the process. Not like necessarily out of the process, but it makes you start thinking about the community that is facing that problem than yourself. Because your first thing is gather more leaders. So you're going straight to the community to find solutions. You're going to have one-on-ones to talk to people. You're going to figure out what's going on the ground rather than like, okay, let me go research the problem, figure out what is the best practice or what are the solutions, and then come propose a solution. The first thing is go gather more leaders. It's like a charge to go into the community. And I think those first steps, the first thing that is very interesting, like the first thing to do. I didn't start that way before. I went researching housing in Ghana. I went researching abandoned houses in Ghana, and I drafted a proposal. Why don't we just do this? There's a million houses that have been abandoned in Ghana, right? And we have 100,000 people in Old Padam, which is like one of the biggest slums in Accra, Ghana. I was like, so we have empty houses, we have people sleeping in kiosks and stuff. Why don't we just like take them, put them here? The research says it's possible, but then you build a team around that and you realize you don't go anywhere because you did not pace to think about it. You realize you cannot just get the houses. There's money involved. There is, let's say, taxes or legal stuff involved. So you're passionate. You want to solve the problem. You have a solution, but it doesn't go anywhere. And I think if I had started with like go into the community, go gather more people, talk to them, figure out who is affected by the problem, I would have from the onset come up with a more sustainable, a more community-friendly approach than like going straight to research a problem and find best practices, solutions. And I think the 5 steps, especially the first one, takes you straight to the best place for the solutions for a problem.
And if I could add, it requires a lot of humility to recognize that you alone do not have the answer. It requires humility to say you are one of many potential leaders who can come together to make a difference. But that kind of humility opens you to much deeper and fuller partnership than otherwise, because then suddenly you're a team of leaders. And the one of the biggest benefits with that kind of humility that leads you to seek out other leaders is you then don't have to feel alone.
Yes.
Right? And not feeling alone can be a real encouragement when facing the challenges that we're trying to address.
Well, like you said, if you have some anger, frustration with something in the system and you want to, adjust it, having a team can be so great. Because I know there are times in some of the issues that I've chosen to try to focus on or be at least one person in my community who's working towards it with others, there are days when I don't feel like it either, and someone else does. Not just that we can all share knowledge and come up with a better solution, but also that team approach can help with the balance of the joy and the. I love this also, this thought of holding both the joy and the anger. Derek, in the community that you live, that you work in, tell me about those two things, the joy and the frustration.
I think, especially in the community I lived in, there is a ton of, let's say, frustration about the system's not working, no income, like jobs and stuff, especially related to my my community. Obviously, there are pockets of like wealth across the whole country, especially the ones I grew up in. But I think before having the idea of like community organizing and seeing beyond like what the system is, I think people, and even myself, are constantly waiting for the government to do something, or waiting for some benevolent, what do you call them, benevolent angels or donors or something to come create a program for them to enroll in, because they are equally passionate, they are angry at the system, but they want the system to change. It's more of like, again, not seeing the inherent ability that you talked about earlier, that if people could realize the inherent abilities they have. And I think that is one thing I've tried to do with the Community Roots Fellowship Program as part of the Community Tent, is to train these specific fellows about the inherent abilities that they have, that if they together go to their communities, talk to the people, they inherently could build community power that could change what they want to do. So for instance, one of the fellows, I think two of them collaborated. They went to this community to figure out what was going on, what they needed. And our project is essentially about housing. But what the community told them was that our school is about to collapse. So that is what we need. Our program is housing, but the community was telling them that their school needed to renovate it. So that's essentially what happened. We had to figure out how to raise funds and bring people in. The community provided their own masons, their plumbers. They provided their own sand, and we bought like the cements, the bricks, and whatever. So the community is always ready to come. And I guess that's another point. The community supports you when you are doing something they want. Because the school provided their own masons, they provided their own sand and materials, and women from the community were bringing in water. So it's like the whole community binds around that idea that they felt like was a solution that they needed. I think if we had gone in with a different idea, we would have to figure out how to get engagement, how to work to get people coming for the meetings, as to they coming voluntarily because that's what they wanted. But yeah, I think primarily that is something I want to change in my community, as to figuring out how to get more people to become aware of their inherent abilities to solve these problems, which over time tackle the root causes of the problem. Because if you don't build those powers from the ground up or talk to people, you cannot by yourself keep waiting for the government to come solve it or a benevolent angel to come solve it. If you organize, you'll build enough power to at least start doing something about it.
Right. Yeah. So that we've leaned kind of into this second one. So we've talked about the first one, gathering more leaders, and then we're leaning into the second one, listen and learn. So tell us more about that step.
Yeah, and I just really want to affirm something Derek said, that the importance of why listening drives this. And I think this also connects with the Phoenix Generation's great work on dialogue as well, right? That broadly speaking, dialogue allows people to understand each other, but even in a community organizing context where you specifically know we're trying to address some particular negative situation in our community, it's still just as important to begin by listening to each other.
Absolutely.
So the listen part of listen and learn it should look like a couple different things. The team of leaders, the initial team of leaders you've gathered, need to be out in the community doing what we refer to as one-on-one conversations to just learn as much as possible of people's individual perspectives, but also through small group sessions, sometimes called house meetings, and also a little bit larger gatherings called community listening meetings. But you're undertaking a whole campaign, first of all, of just hearing the concerns the community is raising.
Right.
What you're listening for are, what are the things that repeatedly come up? What are the kinds of stuff that are motivating people, right? We have the saying community organizing, what makes you angry enough that you want to take some action on it.
Right.
I think, Derek, your example is great, where you initially have a main focus, but as you listen to the community, you realize what people are saying over and over again in your example was, we need to fix our school. And that's how you know where you start to focus. I know later we're going to talk about how you specify and keep things focused, but it begins by careful listening. So the learn part really involves both research, but also understanding how power is exercised in the community.
Right.
So you have to research what's going on in the various issues you're trying to address, who's affected, what the causes are, why they keep happening, what's the history, all of those pieces. And then you have to learn, like, how is power flowing in the community? Who are the deciders that are either reproducing the problems or potentially can be transforming the situation? What's the power structure that is affecting the community's life right now?
Right.
And in community organizing, we're very big on saying we have to be realistic about who currently has the power and how the community can build power to challenge the current system. And I want to be clear, this power is non-violent power.
Right.
This power is ultimately, it's not the power of bullying or intimidation. It's certainly not the power of violence. It's the power, it's the power of a community standing together and saying, we want to be a better community for everybody. And we're not going to accept the current situation as it is. So it is non-violent, but it is built on the strength of the community standing with one or being with one another in a relationship.
Yeah, I think a while ago, when Derek and I were talking about his program and how we could get it off the ground, he was sharing a little bit of some of the dynamics of the community and the rent situation or having to pay to use different facilities, including restroom facilities, and how the whole thing is set up in such a way to make people constantly challenged to raise any funds or whatever. And so what do you know? What do you learn to this step about what the current system is, what the balance is? What are you listening and learning on the ground?
Before that, I would like to just piggyback again on the listen and learn part and linking it back to the Phoenix Generation program, which you've done an amazing job with. I think I always like that the major thing Phoenix Generation does is it takes this step back to community organizing. It's like we have it personal, interpersonal, and rising together. But realizing that before you could even rise together, you have to go through that phase where you listen to people. You have to listen across difference. You have to figure out how to, because obviously when you come to the community, it's not as though everyone is going to be happy you're there. Some people like it as it is, or they've been disappointed so many times that they are very skeptical of outsiders.
Sure.
So you kind of have to first of all go through that phase of like listening to people. And I think Phoenix Gen does a great job. We have amazing resources that helps you reflective listening. Like listening without saying nothing back is very difficult, but that is a very key part of the program that I really like, because then you're not just people in siloed environment. You've been able to move from one person to two people, and with two people you could get four, and then you're building power. Then what can you do with that power? You rise together. You could organize. You could begin to tackle problems that everyone is facing. Because prior to that, someone would think one from the other side is responsible. This one also thinking the other person is responsible. But you bridge that divide, then you could rise together, which is something I really like. And it's built into the 5 steps that we have over here, which is very good. Yes. With the question you have about listening on the ground, I had a very personal experience with it. So I know how it is like when you have to go pay for some services, or the dynamics in the neighborhood, and how everyone is always caught up in like what they have to do, like the next step, and the trade-offs. The trade-offs are very real when you have to choose whether like, are you going to pay your son's school fees, or do you guys want light in the house, or like you want electricity in the house? So those are like stuff that goes on. So it's also complex. It complicates the listening process in my mind, because when you go, it's like in your mind, you think the root causes are housing insecurity, or the root causes are like unemployment in your mind. Because obviously people will come in with like, again, you research who is affected, what the causes are. But when you have one-on-ones, you get to have this layered things that play a role in what someone experiences. So when you come to them, probably in that moment, their main trade-off is they need money for school, or they need
an urgent
thing. So then before you even get to the crux of the problem, you have to find ways where like those urgent needs are met. So but you don't get that immediate information if you don't go through the listen and learn process. Because you would go thinking, yes, this is the root cause, but then you would not get that much engagement because to them, immediately, this is what they need. And I think going through that process also helps you go back to the drawing board to figure out ways you could help find how you could organize them to, yes, tackle those immediate needs, but still channel them to figure out that is essentially a byproduct of the main problem. And you only get that nuanced understanding if you do the listen and learn process. And people will tell you, I'm very fortunate that some of my fellows also have experience with this. Someone interviewed with that. One of my fellows interviewed with that. And you get to hear the feedback. And I think JP was a trainer on the program, which I'm very happy that he helped train my fellows. When you listen to them, they're coming from very specific perspective as to what they think people are being affected by, and you only get those nuanced stuff when you have that process inbuilt in. So I think it's very crucial.
If I could jump in just for a second to build off something you were saying, Derek, and that is one of the benefits of this process, we imagine it as a spiral, right? These steps, it's not you go through it once and you're done, but rather they build and build and build and expand. And part of it is because you start with what people feel most urgent, where they feel the energy collectively. But in the process of working on that, you build people's leadership skills and their sense of connection to one another so that they can then address a broader range of things.
Right.
So you're always, in working on one particular issue, you're always deepening people's abilities to address more issues.
Yes.
And that's part of the power we build in our community.
Yeah, that capacity building I think is so important.
Exactly.
And I love this point you mentioned, Derek, when you start to like realize the nuanced layers of a situation. For me, what that always reminds me when I get to that point, it feels almost overwhelming because like, oh, now there's this issue and these layers. I think there is no way to solve this except for with a large group of people working together. There literally isn't. Like, there's no way. If there was an individual solution or an easy solution, we already would have found it. So collectively, we can start to chip away, figure out how to create a different system, right? And there's always a balance between how do we address immediate needs and how can we work on long-term concerns. The listening part to me in my life has been revolutionary. Doing it with the Phoenix generation has been revolutionary. I feel really lucky to be often in spaces where we have all decided to listen to the other person without interrupting, this is something we try to practice, asking a deeper question. The amount of learning that happens is unbelievable. I mean, again, you can apply some of these things interpersonally. When I, talk to my child and say, oh, you're on your phone all the time and whatever. And he says to me, Mom, different than whenever you were at his age, which we didn't even have phones, not to sound like a boomer, but I mean, there weren't phones at the time. But he also says, I am on there all the time. The National Honor Society I'm a part of is sending notes in Discord about the leadership meeting tomorrow. My classes are asking me to turn in things, my groups at work, like this is where all of my things are. And he's like, I'm not telling you that I'm not also occasionally scrolling to see what's going on with Love Island or whatever. But it is different than the way I use my phone, honestly. And I wouldn't know that unless I listened. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I understand something different. And the amount of times that we've done that in some easy ways like that, but also in some very profound ways. When we were in the community and we started talking to youth and we were asking them how they felt about gun policies and were they nervous, and what did they think? And one of them said, well, I do feel like we have to be very careful to not make gun policies any stricter. And I said, why? And he said, because in my home, to be safe, I have to own a gun. And that was not the answer I was expecting. Because in my lived reality every day, the answer is something like, well, we should protect our rights, or there's, it was just a totally different take from a 13-year-old. And every time I think about legislation around, gun rights or gun policies in America, that voice comes to my mind. And that was 30 seconds. I mean, I didn't dig into this issue in a way where I could really fully understand it. But as we start to really talk to each other and really start to understand each other, we live in the same community. Why do you feel so differently about that than I do? How do we think that happened? We can come up with so much. So, okay, well, we are only on step 2, but we are going to do this in 2 episodes because we want to create 2 digestible spaces for you to kind of take all this information in. So next, we're going to move to strategy. So thank you both so much for being here today. Please tune in to part 2 so that we can talk about what you do now. Strategy, acting, and reflecting is coming up. So thanks so much for being with us today.
So great too.
Yeah, thanks.